Surprise, it's me, J.R. Pepper here for Halloween at Home. Can you imagine? We've made it this far. Remember when they told us that it was only going to be a couple of weeks, and now suddenly we're getting into the holiday season, the only holiday that counts, Halloween. And we're still doing the quarantine thing. Oh, but you know what? You're here, and that's what's important. And I've got some great stuff for you tonight. Yeah, wow. I've got magicians. I've got tutorials of all kinds, crazy cartoons, and animatics, and oh, just you wait. You ain't seen nothing yet. At least not from me. Because I've been reading a lot of books and teaching myself iMovie. But you're here on a momentous night. The night that happens. The night where all the spooky shit starts. That's right. We're here for Halloween. And you get to be here while I switch the calendar. Are you ready? Are you ready, boys and girls? Are you darn tootin' ready to go? Here we go. Try to seem enthusiastic until the drums kick in, please. And here we are. 1, 2, 3. That's right. It's officially Halloween. It's not like it's a calendar and I could have switched it at any time when I pre-recorded this. Anyway, with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And it just seems so fast, right? That time went by so quick. A couple of months ago, we were worried about Marvel movies. How crazy that seems now. Oh, just remember, back when we were thinking about the quarantine, when it first started. Thinking back to that. Wavy film thing, wavy film thing, wavy film thing, wavy film thing. Don't worry, Liddy. Don't be scared. I'm sure that this quarantine will go over just fine. I'm sure it'll be over in 2 weeks, just like they said. I'm sure that everything's going to be okay, that Broadway won't close, that we'll have enough toilet paper all the time, that we won't get price gouged, and that people will take this seriously, and that they'll wear their masks and listen to science. You don't believe it? Bed rats! Bed rats! Bed rats!
Speak the language of love like you know what it means. And if you can't, take my heart and make it strong. Baby. You're simply the best.
David's learning how to live again.
Better than anyone.
Liddy, go back. I want to hug.
Oh, look at the Paris skies, my darling. Oh, we are French. We're guinea pigs and we are French. Eating at the table. No, you're supposed to eat at the table!
That part of my life totally sucked, and I bet it kind of sucked for a lot of you too. Trying to learn different things, and everybody went through the bread baking period, but I learned a lot of things too. I learned that I can sit down and watch 14 episodes of a TV show before I fall asleep on the couch. I learned that guinea pigs really hate wearing hats, and sometimes they eat them. I learned that my dog has a very avid social life with all the neighborhood dogs that I totally interrupted when I was furloughed and had to stay home. I also learned, how many cupcakes I can eat in one sitting, and how amazing burritos are when you don't get them all the time. God, burritos are just great. I also learned an awful lot about tigers that I really didn't need to know. I really didn't. I didn't need to know any of that. I didn't need to. Oh boy. But anyway, so Halloween is going to be very different this year. We're not going to go to parades and parties and yada, 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 all these different things. No sexy nurses for you and no sexy David Bowie costumes for me. But you know what? A girl can dream. But on that note, I have some great acts for you tonight. I have some amazing Halloween-themed Halloween performances and Halloween all sorts of stuff, including some crazy cartoons and some wonderful magic acts and just frankly some really talented people. So after each one of these, you're going to have a little description with a link to their websites and Instagrams, and please support them. Some of them do digital shows, some of them have animation websites where you can hire them, or they have podcasts. Please go and support these guys, because so many of these people are out of work right now, and if they're not out of work, they're certainly not doing great, because apparently entertainment is just not coming back in the way that we thought it was. So we're all having to adapt. So that's the point of this. A, to do something on Halloween, and B, to support the many great performers and artists that I know. So with that in mind, I'd like to present the very, very first act, and I'm going to stop talking and change my dress and act like I have a stylist in this house. Isn't that exciting? Huh. Well, with that in mind, here's our first act. Wow, wasn't that something? With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our next act. Let's have a hand. Puns. We got him. For Christian Cajigal, all the way from San Francisco. Christian? So Poltergeist is a movie from 1982 directed by Steven Spielberg, in which this white family moves to this super large 80s style house complete with fake plastic plants and all that kind of shit. And it's a mom with really big hair, played by Diane Weiss, the guy from Coach, a boy that is, I don't recall anybody ever really screaming out his name, a teenage girl that shows up and then doesn't. She's just not really a part of this story at all. And then most importantly is the little bleach blonde haired girl. And everybody knows this little girl because she's the one that goes, "They're here." She's that girl. So what happens is a guy from Coach makes a family move into this house, and then the mom starts having these super paranormal experiences in the house. Like, for example, she's wearing a t-shirt and she flies up on the ceiling, and then, and not like in one of those Jamiroquai dance numbers, like the ghost make her go up. And then she gets attacked by a piece of meat on a kitchen counter. So symbolism, wow, you know? And I think the boy gets attacked by his own braces, and most importantly is the ghosts totally want this little girl. Like, they're communicating with her through the TV, and it's one of those big box TVs, you know, so there could just be other shit in there, like the girl from The Ring, not these flat screens that we have now. And the little girl is kind of creepy and big eyes and blonde, and it becomes pretty important that these ghosts they really want this girl. Like, they want to party with her and steal her jammy jams and whatever the frig it is that the ghosts actually want to do. When the hauntings get super bad and they realize that there's a giant paranormal vagina in their closet. They call this tiny lady, and this tiny lady
With a really weird voice.
shows up, and she's a paranormal expert, like you do, and she's going to help them to fight the ghosts in the house and subsequently get their daughter back, because their daughter gets sucked into this giant ectoplasmic wop in their suburban home. Ectoplasmic wop in my suburban home. And so this little lady is here to get them back.
And she's there to make the house clean. This house is clean, she says.
And so this involves the mom tying a rope around her waist and running into the paranormal vagina to go get the little. Mentioned that Coach didn't do any map quest on the neighborhood before he moved in, and it just so happens that their house is on a Native American burial ground, because of course it is. And when they rectify the situation thanks to the tiny paranormal lady, then the house just like vacuums itself into the netherworld, and then they now have no house. And the whole time at the end of it, and in the subsequent second film, is the guy from Coach bitching about how much money he's lost in real estate and how paranormal experiences aren't exactly a clause for most insurance things.
What's that? Right over there. Can you see it? It's right there. God! Everybody's eyes are so bad after so many years on their phones. But you can't see it? I can't miss it. It's right up ahead. The next cartoon.
Doesn't this show have just absolutely everything? I really did try my hardest. I actually can say that. We have some special guests here with some advice about how to deal with the pandemic, presenting a Simon Pegg action figure. Simon Pegg action figure?
Thanks, Pepper. I'm just gonna try to hide in front of your lips so they can't see that you're actually the voice of this action figure.
Oh, thanks so much, Simon Pegg action figure.
Well, my best advice here is to make sure you have as much toilet paper as possible and go to the Winchester, have a pint, and wait for this whole thing to blow over. But make sure you take that pint and you drink it outside. Otherwise, we'll never get to leave. Ugh.
That's a scary thought. And now it's time for some scary stories by Elsie von Hessen.
Hello to my, at this stage, purely hypothetical audience. I'm Elsie von Hessen, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my short story, The Patent Master, which appears in the anthology Night Script 6. My mother never spoke to me about her life as an exotic dancer in the island coastal town. I knew that she had lived there, of course, having fled from the mainland after earning her bachelor's degree, in order to prove she would not marry a dental hygienist or auto parts salesman and bow her head each Sunday. This, needless to say, was before her career as an itinerant lecturer, before my birth, and certainly before my long recurrent dreams of jade seas and endless rooms and faceless folk. My mother, with her plastic-lensed glasses and burgundy blazers, a black silk scarf knotted about her neck, dark hair cut in a sharply parted page boy, lips slashed with mid-century crimson when she bothered to wear makeup at all. Moderately tall, she nonetheless loomed above me in her sensible heels, through a cloud of cigarette smoke that clung to her clothes in a gray halo. She liked to have a thing in her hand with which to gesticulate, a glass of red wine, say, or a cigarette. The latter habit had worn a velvety, authoritative burr into her voice. Later, all too predictably, it brought cancer, though she had seemed so imperious as to be rendered immortal. The act of taking a drink or a drag would temporarily sharpen her cheekbones into a pair of meat hooks. She was, by all accounts, a formidable person. My mother spent the bulk of her time lecturing around the country and the world. Thus I knew her mainly from recordings, in front of podiums mostly, or theatrically pacing on stage, or issuing sardonic chuckles on academic panels shot by student videographers. She did not, as far as I know, ever lecture in the island coastal town. I inferred over the years that some formative experience had happened in that town, which she would not discuss on those rare occasions when the subject arose. She would issue a terse, "Huh," and we knew the matter was closed. I did not accompany her on these lecture tours, but was raised at home by a string of nannies and clueless, kindly stepfathers who were content to let me alone to read and tinker and draw. To everyone's relief, I'm sure, it was not the type of child to run around and scream at all hours like the pair of toddlers in the apartment above mine back in the city, reverberations of their stubby limbs thumping like blows through the century-old layers of wood and plaster above my head. No, my youthful nights were spent drifting to sleep alone with the hum and drone of the washing machine and central air, and the great metal box with its gray-painted chassis bolted down in the basement, fueling the churning guts of the house. At these times, the dreams began. Caligari angles, jagged and steep, sharply carved, gleaming obsidian, uneven blocks of top-heavy tenements poised to judge and devour any passers-by, sickly coils of mist writhing at wrists and waists and ankles, narrowing alleyways that recede tautly enough to scrape skin from bone, black jade sea dotted with narrow boats, cresting along on black poles under perpetual night, ferrying silent passengers with heads huddled beneath roiling skies and shades of emerald and arsenic. Faceless folk, bodies like twigs with twine ligaments wrapped in crude oil and tar, white heads featureless but for 2 dime-sized pinpricks, approximately where eyes should be, yet too widely spaced for a true human face. Perhaps a vitreous gleam inside, had I ever dared to look so closely. Weird dreams are not in themselves unusual. Is there even such a thing as a normal dream? Forgetting to take one's final exams, perhaps, or a carnal encounter with a minor celebrity. But it so happens that I return to the same place every night I sleep long and well enough to dream at all. Traversing recognizable landscapes I know better than the buildings of my own street, in the city where I've spent my entire adult life. The Musée des Monstres, with its crowded tiers of gape-eyed dolls and arcane medical curios, waiting for endless perusal. The abandoned shopping mall, gray storefronts colonized by faceless folk, drawing their blank heads back into shadow at my approach. The pallid manse of many rooms where time never advanced through months, through years, through decades, where I am pressed into endless journeys without thought as though all has been plotted out for me in advance. During my mother's rare visits home, she would bring me a heavy coffee table book from some city she'd visited, typically on the subject of visual art, which was the only thing she consistently knew I liked. Yet rest assured that, however surreal their subject matter, my recurring dreams were not derived from these books. At 8 years old, I once fashioned her upon arrival with a crude, malformed clay ashtray I'd fashioned in art class, which seemed to offend or embarrass her somehow, to my utter mortification. We would take in various galleries, followed by dinner out with my current stepfather, in which they would share terse household news and veiled allusions to private grown-up matters, periodically interrupted by waitstaff handing over a phone with news from her agent or publicist. There was, in retrospect, an exhausted, if restless quality to these visits, like slouching on a battered green room sofa before yet another night's performance. Her presence inspired anticipation and awe, but her recordings frankly bored me, as they would bore any child who's lacked an exceptionally precocious level of pretension. After her premature death, she ordered all records of her intellectual property, dot matrix printouts of unfinished treatises stacked in shoeboxes in her office closet, tidy rows of hand-labeled cassette tapes, video clips suspended through airwaves and Ethernet, destroyed by her attorneys. Unfortunately, right around the time I neared my 30th year and finally began to develop some curiosity about her life's work. I was and am perplexed and frustrated at her motives for eradicating everything. Occasionally, both before and after her death, my mother's fans would seek me out or stumble across me in the course of their obsessive researches and attempt to discuss her ideas with me. But inevitably, my eyes would glaze over at the concepts they could not summarize without slathering in a dense layer of adolescent nihilist pablum. They were the sort to sneer at anyone who had the utter temerity to enjoy things, asserting that a mindset heavily pessimized by chronic mental illness represented a valid and clear-headed philosophy of life. Naturally, they reserved most of their scorn for fellow disciples who didn't appreciate my mother's work in precisely the same manner they did themselves. Those who were not affronted by my lack of encyclopedic knowledge of her philosophical oeuvre, as though I were expected to pick this up by osmosis, expressed a disappointment verging on disgust that I stood before them at all, as if my mere existence had driven a red pen through their master's thesis. Thus I was repeatedly thrust into the awkward position of having to feel apologetic for the apparent fact that my birth had unwittingly violated a vital tenet of some complex dogma that was utterly foreign to me. I would find no answers from them. True, my mother was not conventionally maternal in the least, though much to the consternation of armchair Freudian commentators, I didn't and don't feel I was missing anything by having a capital M mother instead of a mommy. I couldn't picture her pregnant, her svelte body swollen with sacs of blood and fluid meant to cushion an expanding zygote, or cooing over knitted booties and duckling embroidered burk cloths, or clapping along with televised puppets singing the alphabet in comic falsetto. I could not even picture my mother as young. I could recall no photos of her without crow's feet behind her lenses and regal silver-gray streaks in her hair. None, at least, until a certain shiftless night at the old house. After a lull of some years during my tenure in the city, the dreams intensified after my mother's death, especially after my return to that house to help settle her affairs. And having awoken at 3 a.m., physically and mentally exhausted from what felt like endless hours of rambling through the black streets of jagged angles, I tried to distract myself by sifting through a box of loose photographs from the closet below the stairs. Photos that were never posted on the household walls beside her stern professional portraits, doubtless because they were so deeply out of character. My mother is a little girl with pigtails and frilly ankle socks, squinting up at the sun. My mother, perhaps 20, with heavy bangs and a green turtleneck and an acoustic guitar, smiling with teeth exposed, alongside a handsome young man on whose lap she appeared to be sitting. And most bizarrely, my mother on stage, a small circular stage extending from a catwalk in roughly the shape of a keyhole, in a black room surrounded by low seats, entwined around 3 spotlit silver poles, long hair teased, wavy and big, with bangs and a Hollywood crest, with bangs and a Hokusai crest, wrapped in nothing but strategically placed white bandages like a brazenly sexualized mummy. A printed label on the back denoted this as a promotional image for a gentleman's club in the island coastal town. That's about as much as my voice can take this morning. So if you want to figure out how that ends, and there's quite a bit more of it, you'll have to pick up Night Script 6 I am Elsie von Hessen.
Are you ready? You got yourself a beverage or a little snacky snack? Because get ready for an animatic by a man I know since I was 9 years old. And he's well known in 2 cities for drawing large boobied women on cocktail napkins. Presenting a short by John Perry. Be prepared to meet some giant lizard women. Woo! Oh, this is terrible.
Who's my evil baby? You monster! You are! Yes, you! This won't hurt a bit. Outstanding! Are you ready to go out and destroy for mommy? Destroy mommy! No! Destroy for mommy!
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Really? Do we have to do this now? Do you guys want to see the pumpkin that Lady Midge designed this year? They do. She's always right. Presenting Lady Midge's pumpkin. What? She says it's not a pumpkin. It's a found art object. I'm not making fun of your art. I like what I like, okay? She's so opinionative. But you can make your own pumpkin too with this tutorial that we have coming up next. All you'll need is some black paper and some pastels. Join us now. Megan, can you show us how to draw a pumpkin?
Hello, you goblins and ghouls. Megan here. I'm going to show you how to draw your own spooky jack-o'-lantern using some pastels. Here we go. All right, what I've got to start here is a black piece of paper. I think that's a nice spooky background color, and it's definitely going to add to the eerie feel instead of starting with white. And here I just have a few pastels. You could try using colored pencils or crayons as well. So what we're going to do first is draw the pumpkin itself, and I like to start with kind of an oval. From there, I do a bunch of parentheses or C shapes that mimic the curve, but kind of scallop in a little bit. And this adds to that kind of like bulby shape of the pumpkin. There we go. And if you're using pastels like me, you're going to want to go ahead and lay in some color now that we have that outline. Cool. And then it gets kind of messy. You're just going to stick your finger in it and give it a little blend. Now, I don't mind if it's not completely uniform, because I think it just kind of adds to the dimension and the texture of the piece. And that's why I like to start with that nice black background, because it gives us an automatic like sense of depth, because we have that black in the crevice, right? This is ultimately going to kind of work as parts of our shadow for this spooky composition. Okay. Now I'm just going to use my yellow and add some highlights. So just on the right side, I'm going to lay in some yellow. I'm pressing down pretty hard. I want to get pigment on this painting. Maybe a little bit on this side, not as much. And kind of blend that out a bit more. And then you can even go in with a bit more orange in some places if you like, to kind of clean up those lines. I love pastels because you can really vary the texture. You can smear them in to get that nice smooth background color. And then every layer that you put on top is just so much more like saturate. It really adds this fun texture. I tend to do a final layer that's a bit scribbly on top. Okay, now let's go ahead and give it a stem. So here I'm going to draw almost like a question mark type shape. And I'm going to break my pastel, but it's no big deal. And I'm just going to make that a bit wider at the base, like this. Fill it in a bit, smear it a bit. Just smear it right into the base of that pumpkin. There we go. The windier the better, I think. It kind of gives it that Tim Burton feel. And you can go in with a darker green if you want to add some shadow, or even add in a little bit of orange, right? Just to give it a little bit more texture. There we go. Now it's time to do the actual face of our jack-o'-lantern. So what we're going to do is take our white and draw some triangles, but I like them to be a little bit curved since we're kind of looking at the edge or the side part of the pumpkin. I'll do another one here, like this. And then you're going to want to have that creepy grin. Think about how you carve it, right? Just really angular. And then, of course, some sinister eyebrows. Now go ahead and fill this in. As you fill this in, you'll go back through and kind of smear it to get it a little bit more uniform. And I recommend using a Q-tip if you want to do this really finely. I'll take a Q-tip and kind of push in all the edges. But here I'll just use my finger, trying to keep it as tidy as possible. And we're laying in the white so that we really ultimately get like a nice glow. Now I'm gonna go back over this around the white with a bit of yellow. Not completely covering up the white, but making sure to push in some yellow so now it's a little bit more of a yellow glow. Like we've got a candle inside. Okay, we're getting close. So now I'm gonna grab my red, and on the right side, I'm gonna color in what is actually the return edge of the pumpkin. So on every right side, do kind of a thick line. And what we're showing is the inside chunk of the pumpkin that we can see, since we're kind of sitting on this side of the pumpkin. Now it feels like we can see inside of it. This is what's really going to add some depth to the piece. Do the same thing here on the mouth. Only on the right side. And now we've got that nice return. So we're pretty close here to having a pumpkin, but let's just clean it up a bit. On any edge where there's too much yellow or things have gotten a little blurry, go back through and thicken up those lines. And I even like to clean up the lines around my carving. Just making that a little bit more crisp. And this is a thin line. It's really just defining the edges a bit better. All the way around. And then add in a little more orange wherever you want. If you want this pumpkin to be a little looser, I tend to add in some wiggles. And there's your spooky jack-o'-lantern. You can even add a little bit of orange to the ground, right? So it's casting like this nice glow. And then we just draw that ground line. And there you have it. You can find more classes with me and more of my artwork on Instagram at Megan E. Waters with 2 T's. Thanks for joining me.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Oh my god, I gotta tell you, part 1 was awesome, and I can't wait for part 2. So, coming up, part 2. Follow the link. I'm sure it's in my YouTube profile if they let me post it, because they won't let me do longer than so much time. Halloween at Home, part 2. But in the meantime, I need a break. Elevator going down. See you soon! Where's my drink? Hey everyone, JR Pepper here. Wasn't that something else? By gosh, by golly, and wow-wee! Stay tuned for more magic, more art, more cartoons, and more fantastic performances. But if you're anything like me, then you probably have a substantial need to use the restroom. What you use it for, though, is up to you. But while you're at it, why don't you go make yourself a fresh cocktail, or a cup of tea, or heat up that Chinese food from 3 weeks ago that's hidden behind the couch. Don't worry, we won't judge. And come back here for part 2 of Halloween at Home. Oh!